line, slightly ahead of schedule. It looks like the connection is pretty good. And so cross fingers for however long it lasts. It'll give us a platform for the show. There's our patrons. Thanks everybody who is stuck. Old RJ, old fart, trying to keep up the operation going while writing books and so many other little things. I'm certainly not unoccupied in my air quotes retirement. Anyway, we'll eliminate that. I sent a link out to Jackson. We'll find out whether or not he can zip in or not. We'll see. And also drop one in the Science Friends section to see if anybody wants to plop in there. We'll see what happens on that. We got, as usual, Replacing Darwin, continuing with the chapter 8. And dear old Nathaniel Jensen's attempts to overthrow evolution. Things have kind of moved on since as to the new book that he's come out with, Traced, that shows that he can't actually apply his arguments to data since 2017. And we'll be alluding to that in volume 2 of Rocks Were There, because Dan Stern-Cognale did it just a hilariously adept breakdown of the technical problems that are assailing the new Traced book that Jensen has put out. But our part 2 of the element will relate to a piece from Karen Bettinger from 2012 that we didn't allude to in volume 1, but we'll probably make a point of bringing in volume 2 that relates to baraminology. And so I'll give you a little teaser about what's going on that, and then we'll get back to Nathaniel Jensen, and hopefully we'll be continuing running show for as long as we can, maybe all the way up to a standard hour. Bettinger admitted that there were problems with the ability of baraminology, quote, to resolve the chromosome number changes within a baramin, unquote, noting they need, quote, explain the vast chromosome number changes within Canidae from a mating pair disembarking from the ark, unquote. This is dogs. This is a tiny segment of the vertebrate community, just the dogs, that they can't account for the chromosome variations if there's just an archetypal created dog coming off of the ark. And can you imagine the difficulty they're going to face with all the other vertebrates that we have and the invertebrates that they don't bother? Because independent of whether they were on the ark, they were still created kinds back in Adam and Eve day. So all of the insects, all of the invertebrates, all of that vast data field, even without the ark bottleneck, still has to be accounted for from initial created kinds. And if they can't pull it off, oh, hi, Lamont. Oh, we can actually hear and you're not a robot. Yeah, the connection has been running at 100%. How long that lasts, I don't have any idea, but we're kind of just seeing as it goes. Anyway, the Bettinger thing is an indication of how out of touch they are, because at one point she noted supposedly the problem conventional systematics had to account for the 42 fissions and 25 fusions proposed for the ancestral carnivores by Grafodotsky back in 2008. That paper happens to be available. And it was actually, we'll put a link up to it. It's actually quite a detailed breakdown of all that shift that took place 55 to 60 million years ago. In other words, the period in mammals after the KT extinction. And the paper wasn't really dealing with something so far down the road as the Canidae. So anybody trying to deal with where baraminology can't even deal with something as narrow as dogs, trying to harumph that over a 55 to 60 million year period, an occasional genetic mutation can occur and a crossover can occur and a chromosome duplication can occur. That's not a problem. So subsequent work that clearly Bettinger wasn't paying attention to, and that's his often work after that in 2012. There'll be a paper from 2012 by Nee on chromosomal rearrangements in the carnivores, and another one from Beck-Limishiba 2016 on pinnipeds and their kin. And then there's a 2013 paper by Deacon reconstructing the ancestral marsupial karyotype, and Kim 2017 for eutherian chromosomes, even deeper in the lineage. So what it is that as the data field becomes available, the scientists who are actually working on the topics, which are not the creationists, are trying to make sense out of all of this data and correlating and organizing it. Meanwhile, over in creation science land, you get claptrap like Nathaniel Jensen's book from 2017, which is 5 years after the Benninger paper. And then the work now in 2022, where I'll give you a little spoiler alert that Dan Stern Cardinale had caught on to a little detail, which, by the way, I had the primary source paper on that was alluding to distribution of human beings in the Neolithic and all of that on a completely different topic. And buried in it was a little bit that I didn't spot, but Dan sure as hell did, that in Nathaniel Jensen's new book, he decides, for one thing, you've got the genetic field of all the different organisms, right? And you have to compact them down to get them within the creation science frame. So the data doesn't change, but just he accordions it all in. He ends up projecting out that this one particular haplotype, I think the R1B1, something like that, is showing up in Italy, according to his model, in the Renaissance, in 1400s AD. And the problem is that it turns out that haplotype is showing up in the skeletons of Neolithic Stone Age people 14,000 years ago, buried in that paper that we'll be alluding to in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. And worse, even if you reject the dating, by Jensen's own model, the Neolithic, hi Vesta, even by his own model, the Neolithic is taking place after the Tower of Babel, but long before the Renaissance. So Jensen's model's conclusions are in conflict with his own model. This is an absolute hilarious mess. Oh, hi, Ian Chan. Yes, Ian is going to be having a debate. And Ian, thank you. You are one of the people who are one of the patrons for the project. Got to wait for that. There we go. He's going to be having a debate early next month with infamous Kent Hovind, Dr. Dino. And Ian was asking about some things about the relationship between retrotransposons and the ALU retrotransposon and pseudogenes and all these different various factors, and what was a subset of what and what connected up with what, because how much of the percentage of the genome is functional. And I had to confess that I don't know of any comprehensive analysis that works out just how much of the genome is due to retrotransposons and how much of those actually end up functional in some context or other. As I recall from what Dan Stern Cardinale had done in his analysis, he couldn't find material either. But if anybody has gotten any new skivvy on this, be sure to let us know. Anyway, the thing was, the thing was that my favorite go-to in this area is the ALU pseudogene. And the reason is because there are 1.4 million of them. I started tracing this thing. If anybody goes through the rigmarole of reading my old tip work at my website, remember, I have a website. It's an old one, but still. I started following ALU way back in the 1990s. And at that point, the genetic work that I had seen from the textbooks and things that I had available, and this was before the internet made it possible to glom onto a zillion things. It was far more rudimentary. They were looking at about 400,000 or 500,000 ALUs in the human genome, of which the vast majority of them didn't do a damn thing. And they were just starting to look into the field. Well, by the time we get down into the 21st century, that number has climbed up to like 1.4 million. And most of them still don't do a damn thing. What I did, Ian was asking about, I put up a laundry list of various technical papers that I had accumulated over the years that related to this particular point, and particularly some of the more recent analyses, because the general trend line is they're looking at, wow, ALUs, what the hell are these? Because they're a short thing. I think they're about 100 nucleotides long, something like that. Or they're relatively short snippets, but they don't have a README code normally. But what they do have is a please copy me feature. So what it is as the genome does its thing, cell by cell, generation by generation, it inadvertently, automatically will copy elements of these things over, which is why there have grown so many of the bloody things. And I think they're growing constantly within the human genome as we see. Yes, 300 kilobases in size. Yes, absolutely right. There we go. Kilobases. And so it's not a tiny thing, but it's not a huge thing compared to the whole genome. And it starts cluttering up our cute little genome bit by bit by bit. Well, once in a while, the little funker can mutate, and the beginning of it can turn into a README code. So what means is it can be embedded inside of a string of genetic information and get ignored completely because the mechanism isn't paying any attention to it. It's just clutter. But if it starts getting a README feature, then it's starting to pay attention to it, and it will include it in proteins, which can cause the protein to fold wrong and therefore cause diseases. So I was starting to keep track of how many diseases were alluded to and problems. I think there's one whole gene that's composed of ALU that is developed over the years and has actually taken on some functionality. And it can malfunction relatively easily and cause diseases, and it's relating to cancers and all sorts of other stuff. Now, anybody attributing this to design is going to have to deal with that theodicy angle. And I don't think poor Kent Hovind has paid the slightest attention to any of this, because Walt Brown and the creationists he pays attention to don't really deal with it much. It's barely mentioned in the intelligent design literature. It got mentioned ever so briefly by Jonathan Wells in the Junk DNA book, and it comes up casually. But and basically he was saying, well, I have an example of a functional ALU, and this means junk DNA is not real. 1 out of 1.4 million? Wait a minute here. We await your monograph on the remaining 1,399,999 ALUs to find out, and counting, how many of those are actually functional. And so to me, they're an absolutely delicious example. And what anybody can do in this area is exactly what I do. Since I try to follow proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and Science and Nature, and then you can do internet searches and all the rest, just keep track of papers that relate to ALU. You can even be being real lazy and just search for the title popping up in the abstract, the main title of the paper, the interaction of ALUs with blah, blah, blah. And so it's an easy thing to deal with, and anybody can keep track of all of these little things. And anybody that can look through those things, paper after paper after paper and after paper, and have a confident sense that any of it is deliberately designed. And if it was deliberately designed, then the designer is a sadist and a nasty person, not nice at all. This is kind of creepyville. So we'll find out. It'll be amusing to see how Ian springs the ALU example in his discussion with Kent Hovind, and to see what exactly reaction Kent Hovind has. I doubt sincerely he's ever studied this subject, and so he's going to have to riff. And so what you're going to see is Kent Hovind I haven't read the book report. I'm going to give a book report on it anyway. I don't know anything about it, and I'm going to sound like I do. So he'll have to kind of connect it up to design systems and maybe something he recalls from bacteria or something or other. And it'll be fun to see just what pieces start connecting up in his head on this. Yeah. It's a delicious subject, and the vast majority of this stuff is open access papers, so everybody can look at it. They don't have to pay a damn dime on it, and I think it's There we go with Ian. It's my challenge to him. I made one, so thank you for that. I'm thanking you, Jay. It was a killer. Yeah, it's such a delicious one, because 10% of our genome is just ALU. And it's a clear indication that until and unless the Jonathan Wellses of the world, or the Nathaniel Jensens and John Sanfords and Robert Carters and a company over in the world of young Earth creationist genetics, ever come up with a model on this kind of subject matter as to when it was created, what was it, if it was designed by God, the original version of it, was it? Is it actually like an organism? Is it a kind? Does God do that? Does Satan do that? In fact, in the volume 2 of the book on the issue of diseases and stuff and how creation is wiffle waffle on this, at one point, John Morris, son of Henry Morris, who's John Morris is still around. He's a geologist by training, and his geology stuff is really no better than Andrew Snelling's. It's still glocked. Yes, I'm not prepared for that, Kent Hovind. Yes, that's another one. Put it on your little Kent Hovind bingo card. Anybody that wants to watch a Kent Hovind debate must be aware of the little Kent Hovind bingo cards that have been assembled by various people. Dapper Dino has made use of them and others, where you can just see when he's going to bring up various topics, because he's not the most original thinker. And that's another thing that I find, that anybody that goes into a debate with Kent Hovind and can't score points hasn't listened to him very often, because he's an open book. Kent Hovind has not changed his debating style or his content much over decades. So you can see there's one advantage of it, that so many of his debates are available, and discussions and lectures are available. Some of the stuff is more recent post-Slammer material. And of course, he's got his current broadcast show that pops up. So there you into the 21st century and the 2018s and 2020s. But in terms of content, the vast majority of it is what he was spewing out in the 1980s. So you can look at an old video of Kent Hovind pre-conviction for tax fraud, and most of its content will still be stuff that he'll be channeling today. So you can pick a sampling of Kent Hovind and familiarize yourself with his oeuvre with relative ease. I would contend that a diligent person would take maybe going after it day on day for like a week. And you can sample enough of his stuff. There's virtually nothing written for him. I mean, he's only done a couple stupid books, and only a couple of those are available online to where you can obtain them from some content. The vast majority of his stuff is verbal. So you got to go with the debate stuff. But good luck to you, Ian. You've had fun with him before. Give a plug for the book if you can during the course of the thing, and say you're a supporter of the project, and you can say the reasons why, because it's all bloody source methods. And source methods is, I would contend, a methodological tool that no creationist can play. It's a game they just crash and burn on. So the more that you force them to offer sources for their contentions, defend the sources that they present. Kent will, I'm sure, trot out his little PowerPoint like he did with me. I derailed him in my debate. I was rather proud about that. The fact that I dislodged him from his PowerPoint. He didn't end up on operating it. And thank you very much. I'm having as much fun doing 2 as volume 1. Holy smokes! You know, anybody that's enjoying the first book is going to be discovering that there's still more to come, because there are so many topics. We'll be going into the human evolution issue. We'll be going into origin of tetrapods. There's going to be an awful lot more on geology for Steve Bauman and all the other geologists who have supported the project. There's a ton of that on that. In fact, there's a huge amount on the Grand Canyon, which will probably be pushed over into the section. We're going to be doing a thing on the paleo worlds and continental drift and all the different elements of that geological frame. In the volume 1, we brought up radiometric dating and the idiot stuff that Austin and Snelling were doing on radiometric dating of the Grand Canyon. There's going to be a hell of a lot more on the actual geology and skivvy of all of that. The chapter that I'm just now finishing up on, Jackson gave me 2 main chapters to work with. One was on the flood geology legends and the search for Noah's Ark and the material on soft tissue claims. And there's a whole bunch of stuff on that stuff. And then where the legends come from, the Gilgamesh epics and the Mesopotamian flood stories and all of that material. And then the other chapter is on the cosmology angle, creationist dislike for the Big Bang, the weird attempts they do to tinker with the speed of light and to try some way to get rid of the heat problem and all of that, which many creationists have been criticized on this matter. And there's an enormous amount of confusion even on the creationist side as to about a lot of these little things. They don't like to give the impression that their side has got giant fistfights going on. And Ian, you can bear this in mind in relation to your debating with Kent Hovind, because Kent Hovind belongs to a tiny little niche that operates at the bottom feeder level of creationism, that siphons off Walt Brown from 2001, little snippets of website material, including Harun, as I pointed out in my debate with him. But he's not really paying a hell of a lot of attention to upper level creationism. I think if anybody that follows, and I don't follow his constant video things from his current digs down there in Dinosaur Adventureland. I only bump into them peripherally because Dapper Dino deals with some of this stuff, and Apologia and various other people will do various criticisms of it over the time. But I don't get any sense whatsoever that Hovind is even remotely familiar, that he even like browses through the Answers Research Journal and even Institute for Creation Research Acts and Facts, where they have not gigantic technical articles, but they got stuff with references and technical citations in them. I mean, so they're not entirely oblivious to all of that. And then you still have the Creation Research Society Quarterly. They're still running amok. You have the Baraminology papers that still kind of lurk out. You've got various anthologies that come out of the creationism conferences. And I think the typical critic of creationism, if they're really looking into their output, we're paying more attention to it than Kent Hovind will. So if it's always amusing, in my own debate I had with Kent, somebody asked a question, and that's another reason why I really love Q&A in these things, is somebody asked about baraminology, and I apparently knew more about baraminology than he did. What is wrong with this picture? So Kent is the Donald Trump of creationism, as I have pointed out earlier, or Donald Trump is the Kent Hovind of American politics. Either way, it's an isomorphism. So we got all of that out of the way. I've been ranting on for about 20 minutes. Let me point out what's going on with the Jensen end of the thing in relation to Jensen. In this chapter, it basically is reprising a point that's been criticized by other people. So the basic point is a problem, that he contends that the mutation rates in organisms that we can detect now are such that they can't account for the amount of variation in the past, and that if things are happening really, really fast, that young Earth creationism can do these. All of this is based on false assumptions. He's got the wrong mutation rates, and he's just done a terrible job on this kind of stuff. But that's besides the point. What I've been looking into is when he brings up actual technical papers, and the vast majority of them are just dangled as source data, where he is glommed on presumably to data that he has then funneled into his calibration curves to chomp everything down. This one that I'll be linking to was from a paper from 2016 by Smeds et al. On the flycatcher birds, and this was a first genomic analysis of them. And once again, he's not delving into any of the content. He insists that the majority of DNA from these flycatchers and the other ones, fungi and others that he's looked at, quote, were due to pre-existing DNA differences. Okay. Yeah. Is that somehow rescuing your case? Not really. But the problem was he wasn't paying attention. Yeah, get a little thing from Ian here. Yeah, even their upper level creationists lie to their audience. Yeah. I'm charitable, Ian, and say that they're damn fools. Although there are certainly instances, Jensen and Professor Dave, in case he lost it, yeah. The issue of whether creationists are actively lying or not is one that is a really serious moral and ethical issue. But there are enough instances you can do where you've only got two alternatives, one of which I'll be bringing up in the new book, in fact, that relates to Andrew Snelling and a chart he tries to pull off on endocrinology. And it's painfully obvious he has misrepresented the primary source chart to give the impression that the samples relate to individual trees rather than big blocks of 10, 20 or more trees per sample group. And his omission of the sidebar where that information was presented in, because I was able to get the original technical paper in an anthology so I could look at the original source stuff, means only one of two alternatives. Either he's an idiot and he doesn't understand what a y-axis chart means, and that therefore he doesn't understand that he has misread what the chart meant. And he went out of his way to put arrows pointing to this as representing only individual trees. So he's a fool. Or he knew exactly what he was doing by excising that information from the chart so the reader wouldn't see it, so that he could pretend that the chart only referred to individual trees. There's no alternatives here. So if you're a charitable sort, you can regard him as an ignoramus. If you're not a charitable sort, you can regard him as a bald-faced liar. And neither one of those are particularly impressive positions to be in. But it's a sad circumstance to deal with. And it reinforces why you got to look at their primary sources as much as possible, and why I'm so obsessive about giving everybody on the show primary source links, not abstracts. Once in a while, something is of sufficient interest that I'll put a little link to an abstract to it, and eventually it may become available. But by and large, I want you to be able to fact check me, and I want you to be able to follow up and be inspired to look up the material on your own. Download the bloody paper and look at it at your convenience and become familiar with it. If it's an area that intrigues you, jump on it and follow it up and look at the material and look at their sources and check their material. And you should find that legitimate sources will never be at a disadvantage when you look up their source data. That they make a claim and they cite a particular technical paper, and you look that paper up and it says exactly what they say it does, and so forth. Whereas when you're looking at creationists, when you look at their surface level and they cite a technical paper and it doesn't say what they claim it does, or they are misrepresenting what they claim it is right off the bat, and these are core claims of theirs, they got a problem. And I have to say, I know of no creationist whose great scholarship I respect, with a few tiny caveats. Todd Wood and Kurt Wise and Kavanaugh seem to be carefully meticulous ones. And there are a group of creationists, I think, who try to be really careful about their arguments. Even Snelling on his sentient days can pay attention to data field. I mean, he's gone after the NAMI bunch, which we'll be discussing in volume 2 of The Rocks Are There. The ones who think that they found a chamber of the old Ark wedged in an ice cave in Mount Ararat. And Snelling gives every reason to show skepticism on it. So we don't even need to go over to the non-creationist side to look at skeptics here. There's a bunch of skepticism in the creationist community. The Noah's Ark has been a recurring problem on there. But anyway, back to Jensen and the flycatchers. The Smeds paper had actually been about a very different topic, and that's the fact that he doesn't discuss it is revealing. They had pointed out how mutation rates scale positively with genome size, and that there is a strong negative relationship between mutation rate and effective population size, which turns out to confirm, drumroll, Michael Lynch's drift barrier hypothesis, which postulates that at some point the selective advantage of mutation rate modifiers, further reducing the incidence of deleterious mutations, becomes smaller than the power of genetic drift. In other words, that there is a bit of a loosened brake on how many deleterious mutations can flow around in a population, based upon the sheer size of that gigantic genetic drift pile that so dominates the flow of the gene system. So it's like little bristles, little nettles of bad mutations, and those can actually occur a bit more frequently. Although you have to remember, what is a deleterious mutation is not necessarily dependent forever. That something can be deleterious in one context and suddenly become advantageous in another. It can sometimes even retain its deleterious characteristics, but become advantageous in a new context, sickle cell anemia being a spectacular example of it. Oh, yes, Slade's good question. Yes, Ian, he's tossed around a link to it. After I'm offline and all that, I'll put the link up again to Twitter, and anybody that follows on Twitter will deal with that, and Ian can let everybody in that as well know it as well, so that they can be prepping for the debate on the subject. That it'll be amusing to see, because of course Ian had a comedic streak, and that New Zealand, Australian snarky quality that is not terribly deferential to authority. And I think Dr. Dino wants to be treated deferentially. When he's doing stuff that's moderated by standing for truth, he's referred to as Dr. Dino. And Ian don't give a damn about that. he does it with particular aplomb. I think he's got actually a more even temper than I have, because there have been times when I've wanted to go, not quite so badly as with Nephilim Free. Nephilim Free absolutely drives me bonkers. There are some ideologues of that type that I'm not at all congenial on. But anyway, back to flycatchers. There was a paper that the Smeds team had done earlier in 2012, which, bless his heart, Jensen cited as well. And we've got the link on that, which was on species divergence in flycatchers. And this was actually about the techniques for how you specify speciation and zygotic isolation. And it was a rather interesting paper. And they noted that flycatchers they studied diverged, quote, less than 2 million years ago, unquote, and how, quote, their history has been shaped by repeated cycles of glaciation in Eurasia, involving periods of allopatric divergence in refugia. In other words, there's a biogeographical history spreading back over 1 million years or more that's connecting up with the flycatchers, and they're interacting with the ecology of what's going on with the glaciation period. Remember, creationists think that there was one ice age, and it took place after the flood, maybe about 2200 to 1800 BCE, and all done in one go, along with formation of coal and the distribution of animals and people running amok and all of that stuff, all happening lickety-split. That's a Keystone Cops picture that I would love to see any creationist try to compress together in any chronological frame, but it's hilarious. Yes, yeah. That's I think there's a degree to which it's delightful when somebody can get Nephilim's fuse to blow. He typically has a manner about him because he has a smug, smoldering arrogance that tends to get other people bursting into flames before he does. And so to push him against the wall and cause him to be the one to rage quit, because there was a time, and it's been quite a few years ago, that I was trying to probe Nephilim sources. Not an easy thing to do, because Nephilim doesn't remember what his sources are. It's almost impossible to get source data from the guy. He trawls the internet as far as I can see. He plucks pictures off of websites and puts them into his little PowerPoints that he does in his lectures, but he doesn't bother where he got them from. And so if you ask him, where did you get them from? It's not easy. Other creationists, at the very least, do pay some attention to their source base. And so the extent to which Nephilim will be grounded in source data is that he will copy something where the creationist had offered sources. And so buried in those will be the source references that he's then assuming are okay, but I don't see any indication that he's ever bought. May 5th Eastern time. There we go. Which presumably will be congenial time frame for Ian down in the southern hemisphere. Spoiler alert for you flat earthers, there's a southern hemisphere on the other side of the globe Earth. I'm sorry. I just, I hate to spoil sport. We got a comment in here. I'm trying to we're hoping that pops up here in a moment. Yeah, it says, RJ, can a Comcast worker? The stream is looking good today. Yeah, I don't know why it's running so well. I made a point of restarting the unit. I've been kind of iffy about how the updated program of Microsoft software was working on this thing. So it's been up and down, up and down, up and down. I just am happy even if it runs a few minutes. I'm not terribly worried about it, because given the fact of how people in Ukraine and the Donbass have to deal with really serious shit, if I have a tiny trouble with my stream on YouTube, kids, that is not a serious problem. So bear all that in mind, and I make no presumptions of going, oh, woe is me, my internet connection isn't as good as it should be. Big deal. I think anybody that has in this world, there we go, finally eliminated the doodad. Anybody that has done material on the internet this way should just be amazed that we can do it at all, and that we can put up information and it can be spread with the speed of light and everyone can fiddle around with it, which is why I want everybody to be on the source methods bandwagon, to where you're asking people for primary sources, asking people for documentation. Do this with people you agree with just as much as you disagree with. Anybody that if they say, well, RJ, you smug bastard, where's your sources for this? Oh, thank you for asking. Here they are, and I will be happy to give them to you. That's how the game works. Whereas people with bad method are going to run from that because they don't bother about source material. They've heard it from somebody. People said, or they've seen it on a Facebook page, or it's somewhere that they can't quite remember. And did we fact check to find out if it's valid? Why? What do you mean? What is that fact checking thing? That's what you're going to find in Tortugan minds, is that they just don't realize that the gift horse that they're quoting may not be real. And one that I was just working on just today, I don't know if you're familiar with, yes, yes, the notion of an ice age all in one gigantic goal. Lime and cold, an ice age less than 100 years, population recovery sufficient to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. Oh, we've got a section on the Great Pyramids of Giza and Egyptology. That's another one that's in the Big Slosh chapter, because the creationists are forced. And I'm old enough to where I remember before this really became a thing, and it's still not a huge thing, even in modern creationism, but it's starting to be a big enough thing that they have to kind of pay attention to it, which is Egyptian chronology straddles the flood. It goes back way before 2350 BCE. And so what do? Well, the Egyptian culture is so contiguous. They're using the same writing techniques. They have the same artistic styles. They have all the gods, and none of which have any connection to the Bible and all of that. That the only alternative they have is for Mishraim and the kids to come into Egypt, which has been blasted out of existence by the flood, if they were before there. And it's their descendants from the Noahic bunch that repopulate Egypt like rabbits at a very high rate, the level that Henry Morris wanted. And then somehow or other, that rate's got to slow down again, because if you have a rate that's 100 times faster than current population growth, which is the numbers they're bandying about in Henry Morris time, yeah, you can get 20, 30,000 people in a lickety split, million people easy to build all sorts of stuff really fast. And by 1800 BC, you've got like 14 billion people on the planet. And by modern times, we would be up to our armpits in people. So clearly they've got a problem going on in there. And oh, yes, Donnie, the used car salesman. I can't get past that. Yeah. So the Egyptians, they've had to move them. And frankly, everybody connected to the Egyptians. Remember, although it's technically post-flood time, when you get down to the Elamarna letters that Akhenaton, they were the archives that have survived of his communication with the various other kings, I think the Hittites and various other ones, are involved in these letters. And they're basically writing diplomatic messages back and forth to each other. Hey, how you doing? I got a daughter here. Would you like to marry her? Solidify our dynasty. And speaking of which, something is going on with that little battle we've been having over there. You know, you want to steer clear of that, blah, blah, blah. And that kind of stuff going back and forth. Therefore, that connects up with all the other cultures in the Eastern period. And any attempt to just yank Egypt down to get the pyramids and the pre-dynastic times, because remember, the Great Pyramid is quite a bit after Saqqara and, Imhotep building the first big step pyramid there at Saqqara. It's just an absolute mess. And there's a small group of people, maybe like 5 in the creationist movement, that are kind of head scratching down, and a few other people on that. So it's not a lot of them, but keep an eye out. and they've got to deal with it. And it's not only them, there's the Chinese culture, and the Chinese pop up. There's a whole, it turned from a footnote into an info box into an appendix, where we'll be doing a breakdown of the highlights of the supposed flood tales around the world. And some of them, surprise, surprise, people who live near the seashore often have flood tales, especially if the areas are prone to tsunamis from plate tectonics. Also, if they live in rivers that have a history of flooding, there's flood legends. But global flood, where people and the animals are put on a boat and they put a dove out and they land on a mountaintop, and that, that very specific Noah story, that's not so frequent, although it does pop up in varying forms around the world. The problem is, it looks like it got there because missionaries went around spreading the story of the Bible. So some ethnographer comes along 200 years after missionaries have been there, and surprise, surprise, some of them have tales that sound a bit like the flood story. Duh. Is she available for a few logos? Yes. The Old Testament has this thing about 4 skins for some reason. Although I suppose because of inflation, it's 5 or 6 skins by now. So we really should probably wonder about it. I'm not sure what the going rate is and delivery times on Amazon or eBay, but that's another side little issue on that. Anyway, back to the flycatcher birds. So that both the Ellegren and the Smeds paper will be putting links up to, and you can follow up on your own in looking at the issue. By the way, the Smeds and Ellegren team were the ones that were also involved in the huge genetic analysis of birds that came out, I think 2014 or so, and I think the paleogenomics guy with feather origins, name suddenly escapes me. He was involved in that as well. I think it came out in Science or Nature, where it was a major recalibration and clarification of the various bird lineages based upon their improving genetic skills. Yes, you can. Well, my all-time favorite, although it was an extremely limited group that believed this, but my favorite maneuver was the idea that koala bears were literally catapulted volcanically from Ararat to Australia. Like that. That one didn't go well even in creationist circles, and I think the last references to it, I think, were even taken down online, so it doesn't even exist online anymore. This was back like 2009, and I think it persisted up until fairly recently when people started alluding to it again, and they decided, whoop, to get rid of it. But I think it was at either Creation Wiki or Conservapedia, one of the two, that there was still a little posting and references to it for a while, but they've been house cleaning on things. This is another area that I was just noticing today and following up on some of my old research on things. Always be careful when you look at the dates that are on or not on a posting, particularly creationist websites. Because, for example, there would be a posting that is dated 2014 explicitly. However, I've got a copy of it from 2013 that alludes to it originally being written in 2012 or 2008 or some other date. And you would have no way of knowing that from the version that's available online. So always take dates with a bit of a grain of salt. If they have no dates at all, you can put a ballpark on it. So if the website is last updated 2015, but nothing in the post dates after 2004, and they've got web links and stuff even mentioned in the thing. If you try the web link doesn't work. Odds are it was written well before 2015. And although the website may have been updated, that doesn't mean that's when the text was. So I tend, when I'm dating material from people who are notorious for vagueness and they don't provide a dating for the actual post, I look to see what the most recent material is in it. And especially if you start seeing web material, and the most recent web stuff is 2005, 2006, odds are that's when they wrote the bloody thing. They copied the paste and thing over when they wrote the thing. So that I would put as a provisional date on the thing. But be very, very careful about that. And especially at AIG and ICR, they are notorious reposters. They've got a whole string of old Henry Morris stuff that they've got like a decade cycle. So they're literally reposting the thing in email alerts 10-year cycles. So I've gotten multiple copies of the same 2004 and 2014, and that happens a lot. AIG will repost the same thing. And so you can look on a thing where if you suddenly go, oh, there's a date from a 2021 posting from AIG. Oh, wait a minute, originally posted in 2014. Oh, wait a minute, the article was done in 1992. Ooh. So you have to burrow down in their reference listings and that to find out where it was. Be careful on all that kind of stuff. And the datings can matter on material. If you're looking at your average creationist, holy smokes, they are not terribly adept at following up on where they're getting their material from. So you can find an example of somebody. I think one of the guys from Campus Crusade of Christ, that we're alluding to it in the new book, he had a posting on Facebook where he linked to a web post on Onyate Man. That's the thing that, and if you've never heard of Onyate Man, don't be surprised. This was from 1999, and it was a deliberate hoax from some people associated with the National Center for Science Education who wanted to I think I alluded to it in a couple previous episodes. But anyway, he had stumbled upon the original posting that was put up as the April Fool's joke, and apparently never thought to check anything further about it. So here is 2015, a decade or more after the original hoax was put up, and he was treating it, oh, look at this. Here's an example of humans and fossils together in the same fossil deposit. Ha, ha, ha. No. And that level of grasping at straws, at credulity, I've even occasionally seen parody sites that are criticizing creationists, for example, in biblical literalism, that are actually parody sites of them, that you have to be, look into it. No, actually, that's not a legitimate Bible believer. That's somebody parodying them. So in the internet thing, it's another point of having an advantage of looking at the various website links. Since I keep in my bibliography the main tracking node, but I don't bother in per se of keeping track of all of the whole URL, because URLs change. There's a whole pile of material where the postings are still available online. They're just not at the URL they were when I downloaded it in 2010. It's got a different URL. But the website itself is sometimes very relevant. And that way you can find out whether something has a track record that you can see, yeah, this is actually a biblical site where they're doing this over and over again. Sometimes you'll even find obscure material that you can't easily find by web searching. That's another toolkit that comes up. Sometimes even putting the title of the piece won't pull up, because there are things that are put in skewing stuff on search engines that sometimes make it difficult to locate the information that you want to. They want to funnel you to other topics and things that are related to it, but not necessarily the actual item that you want to get. So be patient, Grasshopper, when looking into all of these things. Be very, very patient. And if you're looking for stuff, if you're trying to corroborate material, hi Brain, how you doing, kiddo? We've had an actually good operation going on in here. You are mentioned in volume 2 of Rocks 2, by the way, because we've got examples of the stuff that with the criticisms that you leveled about the guy who thought there were giant cockroaches and all of that. It's kind of sad for somebody that is an arthropod lover like Brainbug, that creationists don't pay a hell of a lot of attention to arthropods. And first of all, they don't have to figure out what they were doing on the ark, although a few of them might think, because they've got pollinators and things involved, bees and things that pollinate plants. And so if they're going to have the plants after the flood, they've got to have the bees with them. And maybe, so do the bees have their parasites with them? I mean, do the various organisms have their parasites with them? How did the parasites get to them? There's a whole network of head scratchers that are out there that would need to be thought of, that they don't deal with. Hi, Beach. We've had an unbelievably good connection for the last 50 minutes. I don't know why the gods are with us. It's absolutely a thrill on there. The thing is that I had about 30 years worth of creationist material that I had accumulated, which for a while was forming fire hazard stacks in my basement. And I managed to sort through a lot of that. And when Colton and company were here in Spokane before we went down to the Grand Canyon, they saw the much improved version and the stacks of material around the corners and the middle pool table that were all relating to the Big Slosh chapter. I'm working on the new volume. And the goal is that as much as possible of that big repertoire of decades of creationist material will be able to be incorporated into the new book to bring up to speed about how so many of their issues have mutated over time, or issues that they brought up. That's another important lesson anybody that's going into creationist criticism to bear in mind of is A, the date of the source. So if you search up a topic and you find there's a posting on it that was done at the Institute for Creation Research, one of their impact articles in like 2004, well, la-di-da, that's 18 years ago. Anybody done anything on it since? And especially in their technical literature, where if they do a posting on it, do they do any follow-up on it? And if not, why not? Also, it's always fascinating to find there's occasional people that you discover that they've dropped dead in the meantime. That's why they only did one posting. Very rarely do you find examples of ones who actually change their mind. The late Glenn Morton went from a young Earth creationist on. There's a fellow that actually coined the word polystrate fossil, who eventually became a non-anti-evolutionist, but he still is kind of a prickly little fellow and has popped up in discussions about whether or not Julian Huxley, Thomas Huxley was a nasty racist or not, and his views on human evolution, and that's going to be popping up in the human evolution chapter on that. So, and Glenn Morton, although he was always scathing of creationism over the years, he also was a climate science denier. And so you can find that in the Tortugan mindset, if somebody can believe a silly thing at one stage, they may give up the silly thing and they may get a little better method, but to what extent are they still got a bit of a Tortugan streak in their methodology? And it never quite disappears in some people's cases. So, always be careful about all of that. Source methods always matters. So we've gone almost an hour on here, and we're lucky bejabbers to have done so. Are there any questions from my Definitely Not Peanut Gallery about things that you would like to know about? We've already cleared up. Ian's going to have his with Kent Hovind. I'm busy working on the new book. It's going to be an absolutely juicy bit. I'm firmly structured in constructing my master index and bibliography while writing the work to make sure that I've got all the topics and things reconstructed and organized and subheadings and everything done. And then I'll slip in the page numbers and stuff once I'm actually finished with the main text, once I get all the material from Jackson, and Jackson's had a chance to look over the various chapters that I've done and all that. And we're going to be having a really nifty appendix going into the Baraminology list that's in the Answers in Genesis Ark Encounter. No one's really done any breakdown of that in great detail. That it's hard to even get a list. They don't even supply a list. Fortunately, we've been able to get clear pictures of the chart that's at the museum, and Erica visited the place and built up a spreadsheet of her own that lists off all of the actual members of the thing, so that I can cross-check against that to make sure everything's organized. So this will be a really useful background guide because we'll be able to cross-connect what they list as Baramins versus that are on the Ark. They won't be listening to anybody else, and why they leave certain things off and certain things on. There's bits about why they're making the breakdown as they are in therapsids. Why are they making the breakdown as they are in theropod dinosaurs? Why can they really defend the baramins that they have in amphibians, where basically they're just going for families, but so many of the frog families are isolated genera that are so disconnected, all the little connecting links have gone extinct over time. And so how are they making these distinctions as to why things qualify as a separate Baraminology or not? Needless to say, you're not getting footnotes on that. And you would think that Answers in Genesis and the people who compile all of this stuff would be just Johnny on the spot with their documentation, that they would be really anxious for everybody to see every aspect of how they arrived at the list that they put on board the ark. Why not? Are they ashamed of it? Is it something that's going on in the dark? Hey, we got this Barramin over here. Want to see my little, want an amphibian Barramin? I got one for you here. Yeah, yes. Send me a letter because I don't want anybody to know about it. No. That's not how science runs. And the very fact that they're so coy about this in their own operations, they have a glut of PhDs. They've got people. I'm sure they've relied on dear, what's her name? Susan. Name suddenly escapes me. That she did the bird Barramin thing at Answers in Genesis, and the numbers of bird Barramins apparently match up with her listings. So I'm sure she did the we discussed it in the first volume. My brain fogs occasionally, but anyway, if there's no questions, then we'll probably pull the show on because my gosh, we didn't have even one glitch. Yay! Isn't that wonderful? Now that the mask usage, that numbskull Trump judge that decided to overrule the airline mask usage has rendered her verdict, and that you might want to still keep a mask handy. Even though we've stopped mask usage here in Washington State because we've gotten things whittled down to a good level, I still keep the thing in my pocket just in case, and so I'm ready to go at a moment's notice. The virus doesn't give a rat's ass for any of our politics. It doesn't care who we voted for. It doesn't care whether we voted at all. It doesn't care whether we are conservative or liberal or religious or atheist or anything in between. It doesn't matter anything about our ethnicity or where we live. It only matters whether it's an infection vector. And if we're breathing and it's available, it will do what it can do. And it keeps on mutating, little bastards. They do these things. So be mindful of that and be very careful of that, because if things can escalate quickly on a virus that can spread that easily, we don't want to go back into depressing mode, and we don't want to have draconian things like the bloody Chinese do, where they can just lock down Shanghai at a moment's notice. No, we want to be a little bit more egalitarian about it. So everybody stay safe. Get vaccinated if you haven't. I bump into my friend Teresa, who works in the healthcare industry. She has been advising people and finally got one of her kind of skeptic friends in the family to get vaccinated finally. If you are already vaccinated, make sure you got boosted, and be careful and cautious, but nevertheless live your life. And we want to live in a world in which we want the world to be more like Star Trek. We want the world to be where people are spending less money on blowing each other up and more about doing smart things like building new electric cars and spaceships and investigating the universe and making information available to everybody. Yes, it can be a very prudent thing to do. For one thing, as Japanese and that have discovered for quite a while, it helps cut down on flu. So there's a degree to which a very crowded society and all that just makes a point of wearing masks before and even after the COVID thing. That it makes you necessary to pay attention to somebody's eyes, and you can frown at people and they won't notice because you've got a mask on and they won't know how much you dislike them. So anyway, we're just up in an hour. Everybody stay safe, and we've had an uninterrupted stream. Once the thing is finalized, I'll be putting all the links up to the papers that I'm alluding to with Jensen and also the Bandinger thing, and you can study flycatchers and the delights of vertebrate chromosome adjustments to your heart's content. So see you all next week, and everybody have fun and stay safe.